You feel the pull to withdraw, not as an escape, not as a retreat, but as a quiet rebellion against the parts of your life that no longer feel like they belong to you. There comes a moment when your spirit whispers too loudly to ignore. It doesn't scream, it doesn't plead, it simply grows heavier in your chest, like a fog rolling in from a forgotten shore. That's when you know something inside is calling you back to yourself. You begin to step away from conversations that drain you, from people who don't really see you, from roles that feel more like costumes than home. You don't always have the words for why. You just know you're tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep cures, but the kind of tired that comes from being too far from your own soul for too long. This isn't about pushing others away. It's about returning inward. But not everyone understands this. Some will call you distant, cold, ungrateful, and perhaps, for a fleeting second, you wonder if they're right. You scan yourself for signs of selfishness. Yet what you find is not selfishness, it's ache. A raw, quiet ache for something real, something honest, something that doesn't require you to abandon yourself just to be loved. Carl Jung spoke of individuation, the sacred process of becoming whole. That journey doesn't start with adding more. It begins with subtracting, with walking away from the noise and listening for the sound of your own voice again. Sometimes, distance is the most honest answer you can give, not out of pride, but out of necessity, because you can no longer pretend that you're fine being only a fragment of who you are. You can no longer pretend that being everything to everyone hasn't left you empty to yourself. So you say less, you show up less. You decline invitations that once felt mandatory. You let the messages go unanswered a little longer. At first, guilt bites at your heels. The old voices rise. You're being too much. You're being too quiet. You'll be forgotten. But the truer voice inside you, the one that's just now waking, says, let them wonder. Let them assume. Let them talk. Your peace is not up for negotiation anymore. And beneath that guilt, beneath the worry of how others perceive your distance, there is a softer knowing you are coming home. Home to your thoughts. Home to your longings. Home to your boundaries. Home to the sacred space of not having to explain yourself. What if this isn't the end of something? What if it's the beginning? What if the people who fall away during your silence were never truly with you to begin with? What if the space you are creating right now is the soil in which your real life will begin to grow? When you distance yourself, you begin to see with new eyes. You notice what you've tolerated out of habit, what you've endured out of fear, what you've accepted just to keep the peace while losing your own. And slowly, you stop bargaining for belonging. You stop twisting yourself into something likable. You stop performing worthiness. Instead, you stand quietly in your own presence. And though it is unfamiliar, it is sacred. And though it is lonely, it is also liberating. This moment of stepping back is the moment you stop seeking permission to be whole. It is the beginning of the inward path. The one that doesn't ask for applause, the one that doesn't need to be explained, the one that burns bridges not in anger, but in reverence for the self you buried under compromise. And now, here you are, listening, waiting, feeling, choosing. You ask yourself, what would it look like to live without performing? What would it feel like to be loved without pretending? There is no final answer, only a slow unraveling of masks, of stories, of past selves that no longer fit. You are not lost. You are clearing space. You are not fading. You are remembering. You are not broken. You are in between who you had to be and who you truly are. Breathe here. Stay here. Even if it's quiet. Even if no one claps for your courage. Even if no one sees the fire you've walked through just to return to yourself. Because the truth is, you see it. And that's where the healing begins. There is something haunting about the silence that follows your withdrawal. At first, it feels like peace, like the calm after a long and exhausting storm. But then the quiet deepens, and with it comes everything you didn't expect to hear. The echoes of your own unmet needs, the sharpness of old wounds, the voices you drowned out with noise and distraction for so long, now amplified by the stillness you've chosen. And here you are, sitting with it all. You thought distance would bring relief. And it does. Eventually. But first, it brings confrontation. Because when you step away from the world inside you wakes up, and it is not silent. It is raw. It is honest. It is full of things you've avoided, questions you never answered, pain you never gave yourself permission to feel. This is the part no one talks about. The part where isolation is not serene, but wild, where the silence is not soft, but sharp, where you hear things that rattle you. Why did you let that happen? Why did you silence yourself for so long? Why do you still carry guilt for simply being who you are? Carl Jung said that what you resist not only persists, it grows in the shadow. And here, in the quiet, you meet that shadow face to face. You see the parts of you that you kept behind locked doors. The angry child, the grieving heart, the fearful protector. All of them step forward now, not to punish you, but to be seen. It is uncomfortable, deeply so. You want to escape it, to turn the volume up again, to run back into the noise. But a deeper part of you knows this discomfort is not the enemy. It is the gateway. Because only in this silence can you finally listen without distortion. Only here can you ask yourself, what have I been numbing? Who did I have to become to survive? You begin to realize how loud your life had become, not just in sound, but in demands, in roles, in expectations. You begin to understand that silence doesn't just reveal it heals. It is in this sacred space, stripped of distraction, that your real work begins. You sit in the discomfort and let it teach you. You cry over things you thought you had gotten over. You feel shame rise, not because you're broken, but because you're finally facing parts of yourself you had abandoned. And in doing so, you start to reclaim them. This is the medicine of solitude. It asks you to be honest, brutally, beautifully honest, not for anyone else's approval, not to become more palatable, but to finally meet yourself, not the version you project, not the one others want, but the you beneath it all. And in this deepening stillness, a soft voice emerges, one you haven't heard in a long time. It doesn't shout, it doesn't demand, it simply speaks with quiet authority. You deserve to be seen, not just useful. You deserve to rest, not just perform. You deserve truth, not just peacekeeping. And slowly, you begin to believe it. This is the turning point, the moment you stop looking outward for confirmation, the moment you start valuing the inner signals more than the outer noise. You realize that silence is not empty, it's full of messages, full of wisdom, full of self-remembering. The discomfort doesn't disappear, but it shifts, it softens. Because now you're not resisting it, you're walking with it, you're listening, you're letting it burn away the illusions, the pretenses, the lies you've told yourself to fit into a life that never truly fit you. The silence that once scared you now becomes your sanctuary. Yes, you still ache. Yes. The loneliness bites sometimes, but even that loneliness is different now. It's cleaner. It doesn't come from abandonment, it comes from shedding, from outgrowing, from healing, and that is sacred. You begin to understand why you had to pull away. It wasn't to punish others, it was to stop punishing yourself. You start to see how every moment you've spent alone has been preparing you to re-enter life more whole, more anchored, more in alignment with what actually matters. The silence that confronts you becomes the silence that holds you. And through it, you begin to trust again, not in people, not in circumstances, but in your own inner compass. You ask yourself, can I be with myself when it's not easy? Can I trust the voice within when no one else validates it? And in answering yes, even softly, even shakily, you begin to transform. This is where the healing deepens. This is where the fear fades. This is where you begin to know that the silence you feared was never your enemy. It was your invitation to return, to remember, to rise. There comes a moment in the deep stillness when you finally turn around and see at the shadow, not as a monster, not as a threat, but as a part of you that's been trailing behind, waiting to be acknowledged. You felt its presence before, in your reactions, in the things that triggered you without warning, in the bitterness that surfaced in quiet moments when no one else was around to distract you from yourself. And now, as you distance yourself from the world, the shadow has nowhere else to hide. Carl Jung taught that the shadow is not evil in itself. It is the part of the self we reject, repress, or deny because it doesn't fit the image we've learned to present. It's the sadness you hide behind your smile, the rage you bury under people-pleasing, the jealousy you mask with forced kindness, the longing you pretend doesn't ache in your chest every night. You begin to see it now, because in your aloneness, there are no mirrors, only truth. And the truth is this: the parts of you that you've disowned are not gone. They're watching, waiting, knocking. At first, it's frightening to feel anger rising, unfiltered, to admit that you envy those who seem freer, bolder, more alive, to confess that there are pieces of you you've judged as wrong, weak, shameful. But as these parts step forward, you realize they aren't asking to be indulged, they're asking to be met. When you meet the shadow, something begins to change. You no longer spend your energy pretending. You no longer contort yourself to fit into the narrow space where you're allowed to exist. You no longer fear being seen too deeply, because now you are the one doing the seeing. You start to ask, what have I pushed away that was actually trying to protect me? And the answers rise, quiet and sharp. Your anger, it was never your enemy. It was the voice saying, this boundary is being violated. Your sadness, it wasn't weakness. It was the echo of your unmet needs. Your fear, it wasn't cowardice. It was the guardian of your intuition, warning you where your soul felt unsafe. The more you face the shadow, the more it softens. It stops needing to scream through your behavior. It stops sabotaging your relationships. It stops whispering lies in your ear, because finally, you're listening. And something astonishing happens. You feel less fractured. You feel more whole, because you're no longer split between who you are and who you think you're supposed to be. In the light of your attention, the shadow begins to integrate, and with it comes a surge of energy you didn't realize you had lost. Energy that was once spent suppressing now flows into expression. Energy that once fed your mask now fuels your becoming. There is pain in this work. Yes, because to reclaim the shadow is to feel, and feeling is vulnerable. It undoes you. It strips away the armor you wore for so long. But beneath the pain is power, not the kind that dominates, but the kind that liberates. You realize that your shadow was never trying to destroy you. It was trying to reunite you with yourself. And the truth is, the more you allow yourself to be all of you, the light and the dark, the more human you feel, the more compassion you have, not just for yourself, but for others. You stop needing to judge because you see how everyone is carrying their own shadow, just trying to survive it. You begin to speak differently. You listen more deeply. You stop projecting onto others what you haven't yet owned in yourself. You begin to breathe without hiding. And now, when someone sees through you, it no longer feels like a threat. It feels like relief, because you've stopped hiding from yourself. You've stopped running from the parts you once feared would make you unlovable. They don't make you unlovable. They make you real. So you ask yourself, gently, what am I still hiding? What part of me is waiting to be forgiven, not fixed? And as you sit with that, something opens, a door, a heart, a breath. You step through it. You step into yourself. There is a moment, after the shadow steps into the light, when you're left standing in the echo of your own aloneness. It's not the silence that rattles you now, it's the mirror. Because now, in the absence of noise, you finally see yourself as you are, and it is both breathtaking and difficult. Loneliness wraps around you like fog, thick, cool, disorienting. You try to remember the last time you were truly alone, without feeling the need to fill the space with someone else's presence, words, or approval. This kind of aloneness isn't passive. It presses into you. It asks questions you'd rather leave unanswered. Who are you when no one is watching? Who are you without a role to play, without someone to please, without a mask to wear? The first instinct is to flee, to pick up the phone, to scroll, to text someone who never really saw you just to feel momentarily visible. But this time, something in you pauses. You set the phone down. You let the ache rise. You let it speak. It says, I miss myself. That realization strikes quietly. You've been lonely before, but not like this. This is not the loneliness of being without others. This is the loneliness of being without your own presence, of abandoning your desires, your voice, your needs, all in the name of belonging. But now, with distance, the space you once filled with others is empty, and in that emptiness, your forgotten self begins to stir. Carl Jung said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and yet, how many of us lose ourselves in the pursuit of connection? We contort, dilute, and perform so well that we forget what it feels like to be real. We confuse acceptance with love. We mistake attention for intimacy. And now you see it clearly. You see how many times you said yes when your soul was screaming no. You see how often you kept quiet just to keep the peace. You see how long you've been trying to earn love that never required earning. There's grief in this clarity. You mourn the years you abandoned yourself. You mourn the versions of you that tried so hard, the little one inside who just wanted to be seen. But there is also something else, something new, a flicker, a warmth. You begin to realize that the loneliness you feel isn't just emptiness, it's an invitation, an open space where your true self can finally sit down and rest. You start spending time with yourself differently, not to fix, not to improve, but to be. You light a candle for no reason. You stare out the window and let the clouds move through you. You place your hand over your heart and whisper, "I'm here now. I'm listening." And something softens. You begin to enjoy your own company, not always, not perfectly, but enough to know you are no longer a stranger to yourself. The mirror of loneliness begins to reflect something deeper: presence, authenticity, truth. You no longer need to be seen by the world in order to feel real, because now you see you. You walk through your memories with gentler eyes. You forgive yourself for the ways you tried to survive. You let go of the need to justify your pain, to prove your worth, to earn your space. You belong simply because you breathe. And in this newfound belonging to yourself, you ask, what would it feel like to live without performing love? What if I stopped editing myself in exchange for connection? That's when the loneliness transforms. It becomes solitude. And in solitude, you find stillness that doesn't frighten you anymore. It holds you. You are learning to fall in love with the quiet, with your own voice, with the rhythm of your breath. And even though the world may not notice this quiet miracle happening within you, you do. And that's enough. Because something inside you is healing in the most sacred way, not through noise, not through others, but through the radical act of meeting yourself in the silence. There's a strange clarity that arrives when you distance yourself, not immediately, not all at once, but gradually, like fog lifting from a mirror. At first, you doubt what you see. You wonder if you're imagining it, but slowly, unmistakably, you begin to realize some of the things you were holding onto so tightly were never truly yours. They were borrowed identities, outdated dreams, relationships built on fragile scaffolding of need and convenience, roles you stepped into because someone once told you that's who you had to be worthy of love. And now, as you step back, they begin to fall away. It doesn't always happen with drama. Often, it's quiet, like a friendship that fades with no real goodbye, a message left unanswered, a connection that once felt vital, but now feels oddly hollow. You don't hate these people. You're not angry. You're just done. And it confuses you. It makes you question yourself. But underneath the questioning, you feel at peace. Carl Jung taught that individuation, becoming who you truly are, requires the shedding of false attachments. And so, here you are, watching things unravel, not out of cruelty or failure, but because they no longer fit the vibration of who you're becoming. You start to see which relationships were built on performance, on the version of you that always smiled, always agreed, always gave more than you received. And now that you've stopped doing those things, the bond begins to dissolve. It stings at first, the withdrawal, the silence, the absence. But you begin to notice something incredible. What's falling away isn't leaving you empty. It's revealing the truth. You realize you were keeping certain people in your life simply because you were afraid of what their absence might mean. You were afraid of being alone, afraid of being judged, afraid of being the one who changed. But now that the fear is quiet, you can see it clearly if your closeness depended on you being small, agreeable, or self-abandoning, then it was never closeness at all. It was a transaction. And you are done trading authenticity for proximity. You mourn. Yes, of course you do. Not just the people, but the illusions. The hope that maybe they would see you differently, that if you just gave a little more, tolerated a little longer, they might meet you halfway. But now you understand that what falls away in your healing was never meant to stay. You begin to appreciate the emptiness, not because it's comfortable, but because it's clean. There's no manipulation here, no guessing games, no subtle punishments for speaking your truth. Just space, honest, unfiltered space. And in that space, you begin to hear something different. The voices of people who truly see you, who don't need you to shrink to make them comfortable, who don't panic when you grow, who meet your boundaries with respect instead of resistance. They may not be many, they may not be loud, but they are real. And suddenly, you understand that you don't need a crowd to feel connected. You just need a handful of souls who honor your becoming. You breathe deeper, you feel lighter, because now your energy is no longer scattered across relationships that demand your silence in exchange for inclusion. You're no longer negotiating your self-worth in the currency of approval. You've chosen truth over comfort, integrity over attachment, soul over strategy. You ask yourself, what am I still gripping that doesn't love me back? What am I afraid to release, even though it's already gone in spirit? And in that question, a new permission arises. To let go. To not chase. To stop explaining yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. You're not being cold. You're being clear. You're not being selfish. You're being sovereign. And the difference between who you were and who you are now is this: you no longer see loss as punishment. You see it as revelation. You see it as grace. Because what falls away when you choose yourself is not your life falling apart. It's your life falling into place. You begin to notice it in the small things. First, the sideways glances, the discomfort in their voices, the way people start to ask, "Are you okay?" as if your stillness is a symptom of something wrong. You've done nothing dramatic. You've simply withdrawn your energy. You've stopped over-explaining. You've stopped bending. You've stopped showing up in ways that drained you. But in a world that expects your endless availability, your quiet becomes provocative. And now you feel it, the pain of being misunderstood. Carl Jung once said that loneliness doesn't come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. You're living that now. You want to explain that your withdrawal isn't rejection, it's rebirth. You want to say that this isn't bitterness, it's a boundary. But explaining yourself feels hollow, so you don't. You just breathe. You just hold the silence, even when it burns. It burns when someone accuses you of changing, as if evolution is betrayal. It burns when they guilt you with, "You used to be more fun, more open, more available." It burns when your distance is taken personally, as if your healing has something to do with them. But deep down, you know this pain is necessary, because every time you're misunderstood and choose not to contort yourself in response, you become freer. Every time you're judged and stay soft anyway, you reclaim your strength. And every time someone projects their discomfort onto you, you learn to stop catching what was never yours to hold. It's not easy. Your nervous system still flinches. That old reflex to defend, to justify, to soften your boundary to make someone else feel better, it still lives in your bones. But now, you notice it, and that awareness is the beginning of your liberation. You realize that people often react not to who you are, but to who they think you should be. And when you step out of the role they assign to you, caretaker, peacekeeper, entertainer, they don't always know what to do with the real you, the unmasked you, the version who says no without guilt, the one who doesn't rush in to fix what was never hers to fix. And so, they call you distant, detached, cold. But you know what they're really saying. You are no longer convenient for my comfort, and that is not your burden to carry. You ask yourself, can I sit in this misunderstanding and still be true to myself? Can I let go of needing to be liked in order to be free? These are not easy questions, but the more you ask them, the more your soul answers with clarity. Yes, you can. Because the cost of self-abandonment is too high. because contorting for connection leaves you more alone than any solitude ever will. So instead of defending yourself, you honor your truth in silence. Instead of trying to be understood, you focus on understanding yourself. You let the world misread your quiet as weakness, not because it is, but because your energy no longer exists to correct every misperception. This is a sacred kind of strength, a quiet resistance to the noise that once governed your every move. And with each misunderstood moment, something unexpected happens. You grow softer inside, not toward the ones who judge you, but toward yourself. You begin to comfort the parts of you that once needed their validation. You begin to wrap warmth around the child inside who just wanted to be liked. You begin to say, I see you, I hear you, and I'm proud of you for choosing peace over performance. This is how healing looks, sometimes not like victory, but like choosing not to fight where there's no understanding to win. You start to meet other souls who understand, not because you explain, but because they've been there too. They recognize the quiet. They don't flinch when you speak your truth. They don't punish your absence or demand your constant presence. They just see you and let you be. And that, too, is a miracle. Because when you've spent a lifetime being misunderstood, being seen even a little feels like oxygen. So you breathe, you allow, you trust. You continue walking your path, not because it's easy, but because it's yours. When the world grows quiet around you and the outer demands fade into the background, something curious begins to stir in the depths of your inner world. Emotions you hadn't fully named, memories you thought you'd left behind, sensations that rise uninvited and yet feel strangely familiar. This is not regression, it's alchemy. The solitude you feared begins to work on you. You wake one morning and feel a heaviness in your chest. Not sadness, exactly more like a grief with no name, a quiet ache that hums beneath the surface. And instead of distracting yourself from it this time, you let it be there. You let it breathe. You don't try to fix it, label it, or solve it. You simply stay with it. And in that presence, something begins to shift. Carl Jung believed that the psyche has an innate drive toward wholeness, that even our most painful states contain the seed of transformation. And now, in this moment of stillness, you start to feel it, not intellectually, but viscerally. Your emotions, once chaotic and overwhelming, begin to soften. They begin to move, not outward, but inward into something more coherent, more compassionate. The sadness becomes insight. The anger becomes boundary. The fear becomes guidance. You begin to realize that your emotions are not problems to solve, they are teachers. Each one carries a message, a wisdom, a mirror. They don't need to be fixed, they need to be felt. And when you allow them to speak without silencing them, they stop screaming. This is the alchemy of stillness. You are not being punished, you are being refined. You remember moments in your life when you pushed things away too quickly, when you ran from heartbreak before it could teach you, when you numbed your grief before it could cleanse you, when you silenced your rage before it could show you where your soul had been violated. And now, you are choosing a different path. You're allowing the fire to burn, not to destroy, but to purify. You're allowing the flood to come, not to drown you, but to wash away what no longer serves. It's not dramatic, it's not loud, it's often just you, sitting alone, feeling the full weight of an emotion you've spent years avoiding. And yet, within that simplicity, something sacred happens, a space opens, and from that space, clarity arises. You begin to see patterns that once seemed invisible. You notice how your anxiety was often just suppressed intuition, how your depression was not laziness, but the soul's protest against a life that wasn't true, how your numbness wasn't failure, but self-protection. Everything starts to make sense, not all at once, but in tender, scattered pieces, as if your soul is gently handing you back parts of yourself you thought were lost. And in that reclamation, you stop asking what's wrong with you. You start asking, what do I need right now to feel safe in my own presence? That question alone is medicine. You begin to light candles, not for anyone else, but for yourself. You cry without shame, and the tears feel like salt on old wounds that are finally healing. You breathe deeper, you move slower, you listen more gently. You start to honor your rhythms, the days you need rest, the moments you need to be alone, the emotions that come like waves and leave like wind. No more forcing, no more fixing, just presence. And it's here, in this sacred stillness, that you discover something profound. Your soul has always known the way. You were just too overwhelmed to hear it, too distracted to feel it, too busy being everything to everyone to be anything to yourself. Now, you are listening. You are becoming. You are softening and strengthening all at once. And the beauty of it all is that no one needs to see this transformation but you. You don't have to post it. You don't have to prove it. You don't have to perform it. You just have to live it. You ask yourself, what part of me is ready to emerge now that the noise is gone? What version of me has been waiting in the wings, watching, hoping, believing? And when you ask, you feel her or him or them smile. Because finally, you're coming home. Not with answers. Not with perfection. But with presence. And that is everything. Something begins to change in you, not loudly, but undeniably as you grow more comfortable in your own company. You notice the space that used to be filled with anxious overthinking is now quieter, more curious. You begin to sense a voice rising not from outside, not from memory or pressure, but from somewhere deep within. And it isn't shouting. It's not afraid. It's steady. It's yours. You are reclaiming your inner voice. For so long, that voice had been crowded out by the noise of others, what they wanted, what they expected, who they told you to be. You adjusted your volume to match theirs. You edited your truth to keep the peace. You spoke carefully, not honestly, and slowly. The voice inside you dimmed to a whisper, you. But now, in this space you've made through distance, it returns. At first, it's hesitant, like a child unsure if it will be punished for speaking too loud, but you meet it with tenderness, not fear, and so it grows stronger. You begin to trust it. Carl Jung spoke often of the self, the deeper, unified essence that emerges when the conscious and unconscious parts of you meet in truth. And now, you feel that meeting beginning to take shape. The voice that once felt like background static is now your compass. It doesn't always give you answers, but it gives you direction, and that's enough. You notice how your intuition shows up not as logic, but as resonance, as knowing, as a calm certainty that doesn't need to be defended. You realize that your truth doesn't need to be louder than anyone else's. It just needs to be honored. You start saying no without guilt, yes without fear. You stop explaining yourself unless it feels kind to do so. You let silence answer questions that used to trap you in over-explanation. And in this quiet confidence, your life begins to change. You no longer seek out conversations that drain you just to feel included. You no longer pretend to agree just to avoid conflict. You no longer wait for others to give you permission to feel what you feel, want what you want, need what you need. Your voice has become your sanctuary. There is a beauty in this that few will understand, because reclaiming your inner voice doesn't come with applause. It often goes unnoticed by the world, but you notice, and that noticing builds trust. You begin to rewrite your inner narrative, the one that said you were too much, too sensitive, too quiet, too emotional. You stop arguing with it. You just let it go, because you know now those words were projections, not truth. You ask yourself, what beliefs about myself have I carried that were never mine to begin with? And in the asking, you begin to untangle them. You sit with old stories and say, I don't believe this anymore. You hear the inner critic and respond, you are not my voice. You start replacing shame with gentleness, doubt with curiosity, noise with stillness. There is strength in this simplicity. There is freedom in this return. You begin to feel safe within your own skin. Not all the time, but more often than before. And when you don't, you know how to return to yourself not through fixing, but through listening. And now, when you look in the mirror, you don't just see a face, you see someone becoming. Someone brave enough to pause, brave enough to listen, brave enough to trust what she hears. This is not about being loud or right. It's about being real. It's about letting your life align with your voice, not the one shaped by fear or expectation, but the one that emerges when you finally get quiet enough to hear it. And so you continue, you walk your path, not because others understand it, but because it is true. You speak your truth, not to convince anyone, but to stay connected to yourself. And when the world grows loud again, as it always does, you return to that sacred question, what is true for me now? And from that question, a life begins to take shape, not borrowed, not inherited, but born of your own voice. There comes a moment when you realize the path you are walking is no longer paved by people's expectations, but by your own choices. And these choices, though small, begin to form a map, a shape, a life that finally feels like it belongs to you. It doesn't happen with one grand declaration. It happens in the quiet defiance of the word no. No, I won't betray myself to belong. No, I won't overextend to keep peace that harms me. No, I won't apologize for the parts of me that make others uncomfortable. You begin to understand that individuation, the becoming of your true self, is not a mystical process far removed from the everyday. It is woven into the very act of setting boundaries. Each time you say no when you once would have said yes, a piece of your soul returns. Carl Jung taught that becoming whole means confronting everything you are and everything you are not. That the path to the self is not through compliance, but through confrontation. And here you are, finally confronting the ways you've been disappearing from your own life. You used to believe that love meant sacrifice, that worthiness required endurance, that peace came from pleasing others. But now, you begin to see the cost of those beliefs, how they hollowed you out, how they taught you to distrust your instincts, your needs, your voice. And so you begin again, with one no, then another, each one shaky, but sacred. You say no to the invitation that feels like obligation. You say no to the conversation that feels like self-betrayal. You say no to the habit of rescuing others while abandoning yourself. At first, it feels selfish, but only because you were taught that your needs were too much, that your time was negotiable, that your worth was tied to your usefulness. And now you see the truth: self-abandonment is not love, it is survival, and you are ready to live, not just survive. There's grief here, not just for what you let go of, but for how long you stayed. You think back on all the times you betrayed yourself just to be accepted, all the times you sensed something was wrong, but went along anyway, all the times you heard your own voice whispering no and silenced it. You don't judge yourself for those choices. You understand them now. You thank yourself for surviving them, and then you choose again. And in choosing again, you ask, what kind of life emerges when I trust my inner boundary more than outer approval? You begin to feel it a life built on clarity instead of confusion, connection instead of codependence, strength instead of silence. You stop explaining your boundaries as if they're up for debate. You stop apologizing for taking up space. You stop shrinking in rooms that can't hold your fullness. And something begins to settle in your bones, a steadiness, a quiet certainty, a calm that isn't performative, it's earned. You don't need others to understand your no. You don't need to defend your growth. You don't even need to prove your peace. You just live it. You begin to see boundaries not as walls, but as invitations. They tell others how to love you, how to meet you, how to respect the sacredness of your becoming. And yes, some people leave, some relationships dissolve, some misunderstand your softness as coldness, your clarity as cruelty. But those who remain, those who meet your boundaries with reverence, become mirrors of your healing. You learn that saying no is not the end of connection. It is the beginning of true connection. You learn that the more you honor your truth, the more your life aligns with what your soul has been asking for all along. You are no longer living from obligation. You are living from alignment. And it changes everything. Because now, your yes means something. Now, when you show up, you are not fragmented, you are whole. You ask yourself, what would my life look like if I never betrayed myself again? And that question becomes a promise, one you keep with each sacred no. Eventually, you begin to feel it not just as a hope, but as a lived truth you are returning, not to who you were, not to some idealized version of yourself, but to something deeper, older, more essential, a self that has been waiting patiently beneath the noise, the people-pleasing, the constant striving, a self untouched by the masks you wore, a self forged in the quiet, in the space between what was lost and what is now being born. And this return is not marked by grand gestures. It comes in the small, almost imperceptible ways your body relaxes into truth, in the way your breath deepens when you speak your needs without flinching, in the way you walk through the world with less urgency, less hunger for external validation. It's not that the world has changed, it's that you have. Carl Jung described this journey toward wholeness as the integration of all that was once fragmented. And now you understand why you had to walk away, why you needed the silence, the distance, the shedding. It wasn't punishment. It wasn't abandonment. It was the sacred dismantling of everything that was never really you. The return doesn't happen all at once. There are still days when you feel lost, when old patterns tug at your sleeves, when the longing to be seen by others clouds your inner clarity. But you come back faster now. You know how to return. You have built a path through the forest of your own becoming, and your feet remember the way. You begin to carry yourself differently, not with arrogance, but with a quiet dignity. You speak with a calm that doesn't need to convince. You move with a softness that no longer seeks approval, and this time, when you are seen. It is not because you performed it, it is because you allowed. You ask yourself, who am I when I no longer need to be anything but true? And you smile at the answer, not because it's easy, but because it's honest. You reconnect with the world in a new way, not from a place of proving, but from a place of presence. You engage without losing yourself. You love without abandoning your boundaries. You listen without absorbing what is not yours. You no longer fear being misunderstood because you have understood yourself. You no longer chase love because you have learned to rest in it. You no longer sacrifice your truth for peace because you know that real peace includes your truth. And slowly, everything shifts. Relationships deepen or dissolve, but always in service of truth. Work becomes aligned with your essence, not just your skills. You no longer search the horizon for something to complete you, because what you were looking for has always lived within. This return to self is not a destination. It is a rhythm, a dance, a quiet, daily choosing to show up as you are, to listen, to honor, to breathe. And now, when people meet you, they feel it, the difference, the groundedness, the depth. They sense the journey you've walked, even if they don't know the details. They see the fire in your eyes, not as anger, but as truth reclaimed. They feel the stillness in your presence, not as distance, but as devotion. And you feel whole, not perfect, not finished, but whole in all your messy, luminous becoming. And this, truly, is the gift of distance. Not disconnection, but deeper connection. Not isolation, but inner alignment. Not loss, but liberation. You have returned. And though nothing outside may have changed, everything inside has. Because now, you live by a different truth. One that does not beg. One that does not perform. One that simply is. You ask yourself one final time, what kind of love, life, and peace can I build when I choose myself completely? And your soul answers, quietly, as it always does. When you choose yourself, the world learns to love the real you. So now, the path stretches softly behind you, each step you've taken, etched in quiet courage. The noise you left behind still echoes faintly in the distance, but it no longer calls you back. You've learned how to walk away without bitterness, how to sit in silence without fear, how to let go without losing your center. And most of all, you've learned how to come home to yourself. Breathe with that. Let it settle. You've traveled through fire and fog, through grief and grace, through the ache of solitude into the comfort of your own company. You've stared into your shadow and chosen to hold it with compassion instead of judgment. And now, here you are, more whole, more steady, more alive. There is nothing more to fix in this moment, nothing more to prove. Just your breath, just your presence, Let your shoulders drop. Let your heart open. Let the gentleness of your own becoming cradle you as you rest. No need to rush. No need to plan. This stillness is not a pause. It is the beginning of something new. A quieter life. A deeper truth. A softer, stronger you. You are not lost. You are not broken. You are not behind. You are exactly where your soul has led you. And as you breathe into this knowing, may these final words linger in your chest like a soft light. The love you seek is already within you.